concrete measures taken to achieve those goals, and the impact of those measures properly evaluated in terms of whether they worked or not, or how much of their intended targets are achieved. We have information that minority ethnic representation across political areas remain low, despite the progress that has been made in the recent years. I will stop here and let the co-rapporteur, Madam Stavrinaki, to continue with her teams on racial profiling and use of force and impact of counter-terrorism strategy on ethnic minorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kut. Ms. Stavrinaki, please.
Thank you, Chair and Rapporteur, and good morning also to everyone, and welcome back. So indeed, I will discuss some difficult issues, starting with racial profiling and use of force. The State Party report, official statistics, and independent reports confirm that stop and search practices continue to disproportionately harm people of African descent and ethnic minority communities. Additionally, particular concern is raised in relation to immigration checks carried out on journeys within the common travel area and the open land border. The serious violence, instead of redressing these issues, the Serious Violence Reduction Orders Pilot and the Public Order Act 2023 expanded suspicion-less stop and search powers. Additional concerns include the lack of legislation and guidance on facial recognition technology, the rising number of shocking strip searches against children, especially those of African descent, over 6 times more likely to be stripped and searched, and the increasing use of force, including the use of tasers against people of African descent and ethnic minorities. Police-involved deaths are also on the rise, with a working group of experts on people of African descent in the recent visit, highlighting severe police misconduct, ineffective investigations, and failures to support victims' families. People of African descent and ethnic minorities are severely underrepresented in the police workforce and are also victims of racial discrimination, those that serve within the police and the military institutions. There is strong convergence in independent reports and submissions that institutional racism against people of African descent and ethnic minorities has not been effectively addressed since the last dialogue with the committee. So, as you know, the committee has adopted, since our last dialogue, the General Recommendation number 36 on racial profiling. So what steps has the State Party taken to introduce some of the guidelines of the committee's General Recommendation into domestic practices, including protections against algorithmic profiling? Could the State Party clarify the use of suspicion-less stop and search and the measures in place to prevent and eliminate racial discrimination? Does the State Party intend to introduce specific measures to enhance police accountability, including in relation to artificial intelligence and biometric surveillance technology? Does the State Party plan to establish an independent mechanism of investigation of police misconduct in accordance with human rights standards, so outside the police, and appropriate composition in investigations of racial discrimination, so not only comprised of white police officers? Will the State Party implement the Children's Commission recommendations on strip searches? And will the State Party ensure that policing complaints and misconduct issues include demographic, disaggregated data such as ethnicity? So what actions has the State Party taken to address the hostile environment within police forces for officers from minority ethnic communities, and to improve the diversity and inclusion training provided? Here we have a specific concern by Police Scotland, which the Angelini Complaint Review has described as superficial. Furthermore, how does the state party plan to rebuild trust between the police and the racial and ethnic communities that are both underprotected and over-policed? I now pass to the impact of counter-terrorism strategy on ethnic minorities. The Independent Reviewer of Terrorism has noted that Schedule 7 of the Terrorist Act 2000, which allows police to stop, search, detain individuals at airports and ports without the need for reasonable suspicion, is a counter-terrorism power that elicits particular concern among a significant minority. Increase of police presence in schools in marginalized areas is reported, which disproportionately, of course, exposes children from ethnic minorities to strip searches and referrals to the criminal justice system. There is a disproportionate effect on adults protected by the Convention and on children belonging to ethnic or ethno-religious groups, in particular of Muslim origin, religion, including on freedom of expression and the right to education. Please provide disaggregated data on the ethnicity and religion of children referred to PREVENT, along with qualitative data on these referrals and interventions and measures to redress false and unfair referrals and interventions. According to publicly available data, the number of referrals adopted as a channel case for concerns related to extreme right-wing radicalization decreased by 13% compared with the previous year. Please update the committee on the steps taken to ensure transparency and accountability in the implementation of counter-terrorism programs and strategies. Does the state party consider repealing the obligation of teachers and health providers in public institutions to report young individuals under the PREVENT program and provide effective guarantees against abuse, access to important information such as the police file for persons concerned by PREVENT to defend themselves against stigmatization? I now pass to my last point on criminal justice system and ethnic minorities. The committee welcomes the independent reviews of the criminal justice system and police commissioned by the governments, all of which highlight the issue of institutional racism. The Lamy Review offers a comprehensive view of how people of African descent and ethnic minority communities face disproportionate targeting at every stage of the criminal justice process. It points out the overrepresentation of Gypsy, Roma, and traveler children in secure training centers over the past decade. Analysis of indictable offenses from 2018 to 2022 shows a notable correlation between ethnicity and the likelihood of receiving a custodial sentence. When factoring in offender and case characteristics, people of African descent offenders and those of mixed ethnicity were more likely to receive custodial sentence compared to white offenders. Specifically, drug offenses showed the most significant disparity, with offenders from most ethnic minority groups being more likely to be sentenced to custody. Additionally, in many prisons, relations between staff and ethnic minorities and people of African descent are strained. What actions has the state party taken to address the recommendations in these reviews, particularly the Lamy recommendations? Please update us on specific outcomes, and also update the committee on the outcomes of the drug diversion schemes mentioned in paragraph 183 of the state party report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vrinaki. Some supplementary questions from the country rapporteur. Mr. Kut, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Since Madam Stavrinaki has raised the issue of police, I'm going to have a number of additional questions related to freedom of expression, assembly, and association. As I have said yesterday, for the committee, these are not zero-sum games. We are equally interested in the freedom of expression when it comes to vulnerable groups, especially. Now, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 introduced a number of changes to public order legislation, giving the police greater powers to impose conditions on protests and possibility of restricting process, if they see fit. The UK government then also introduced the Public Order Act of 2023, expanding the police powers to impose restrictions on protests. Now, there were allegations that these measures were taken in response to the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020. Then, however, there are also allegations that the police is using double standard in policing after recent Palestine solidarity demonstrations. Muslim students reported that government surveillance of their social and cultural communities on campuses across the United Kingdom, discriminatory restrictions on their freedom of expression, assembly, and association. We have allegations that parts of the media and even the UK government officials have portrayed the Palestine solidarity protests as dangerous and extreme. Politicians, in some instances, have made inflammatory statements, such as describing the protests as hate marches and even linking them to terrorism. Are these allegations true? What are the measures that can be planned so that there is no double standards in defending the freedom of expression, assembly, and association in the UK? That would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kut. And now I will return the floor to the delegation for its responses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kut, Ms. Stavranaki, and for very thoughtful questions. I will first invite my colleague, Mr. Smales, from our Cabinet Office to respond, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kut, for your questions about affirmative action, or what we describe in the UK as positive action. So positive action is permitted under the Equality Act 2010. This allows employers and service providers to take proportionate action that aims to reduce disadvantage, meet different needs, and increase participation for groups who share a particular protected characteristic, including race. So Inclusive Britain included actions to increase diversity among the judiciary and magistracy. These commitments included working with the Judicial Forum to increase the pool of applicants, ensure the very best talent is promoted through professions and onto the bench. So this included initiatives such as the Pre-Application Judicial Engagement Programme, which supports lawyers from underrepresented groups, including those from ethnic minority backgrounds who are considering applying for a judicial appointment. The latest statistics that I have to hand, which were published in July 2023, showed that the proportion of judges who identified as being from an ethnic minority background had increased from 7% in 2014 to 11% in 2023. 18% of new entrants to the judiciary in 2022 to 2023 were from an ethnic minority background. So this data is published annually, so this is part of our reporting programme for Inclusive Britain, and we also publish update reports to the UK Parliament in April 23 and May 2024. You also asked about representation in politics. So the view of the previous government was that political parties should lead the way in increasing diverse electoral representation through their own approaches to the selection of candidates. I think, as I said yesterday, the new government is considering whether to commence Section 106 of the Equality Act 2010, which is about publishing data on the protected characteristics of those standing for elected office. It's probably worth reflecting here that the new UK Parliament, elected in July, is the most diverse on record and sets a number of firsts, including a record number of women MPs, a record number of those from an ethnic minority background, and the biggest share of state-educated MPs since 1979. According to analysis by the BBC, the proportion of MPs from ethnic minority backgrounds is now 90, around 14%, and this is up from 66 at the last election in 2019, and up from 4 ethnic minority MPs in 1987. Just on data, while I'm here on data, just a quick reference as well to the UK civil service. We now have a record number of ethnic minority civil servants. Representation now stands at a record high of 16.6%, sorry. This is an increase from 15.4% in 2023 and 10.2% in 2014. There are also more women than men in the UK civil service, and while men outnumber women in the senior civil service, the percentage of women is increasing and now stands at 48.2%. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Thank you, Mr. Coot and Ms. Dravanaki. I'd like to address a number of the points that you made. I'm going to try and conflate one or two of them together just for the sake of ease and time, because I think they are naturally conflated anyway. And those are around the numbers of people being stopped and searched in our communities, as well as facial recognition technology and a couple of other things related to that you asked specifically. Let me begin by saying we recognise that there are issues in our numbers, but we are very, very proud of the fact that the numbers of ethnic minorities being stopped and searched in the United Kingdom have decreased recently. What's quite impressive is that ethnic minorities disparities have fallen significantly in recent years. You are now 3 times less likely to be stopped and searched if you're from an ethnic minority background than you would have done 3 or 4 years ago. So I think we're moving in the right direction. However, there is recognition that there's still much more to be done. Just to give you some figures relating to that, in 22-23, people identified as black or black British were 2.2 times more likely than people identifying as white to be arrested, and that's down from 2.4 and 2.6 the 2 years beforehand. So we are clearly moving in the right direction, but there is also much more to be done, and we are recognising that that has to be worked on. Police forces up and down England and Wales are taking the matter very seriously, and there is enormous amounts of training available, awareness raising, and working with community groups throughout England and Wales to try to inform police officers better about what is taking place and how to avoid these occurrences taking place in the future. Moving on to your question around strip search of children, again, an incredibly significant and worrying issue for us to deal with, but I will say that we are working closely with Department for Education, as well as local education authorities and community groups, to try to avoid occurrences of this happening, except in extreme circumstances and where absolutely necessary. Going back to the issue of stop and search and conflating that with the strip search of children, police have very, very clear guidelines, and they are accountable under law for any actions they take in this manner. So where there are problems occurring, they will be referred to the Independent Police Complaints Committee, as well as local community organisations have the opportunity to refer people to police complaints as well. So there are mechanisms for and avenues for recourse should things unfortunately go wrong in that space. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to your question around counter-terrorism legislation and disaggregated data. I don't have the data to hand right now, so we will provide that in writing if that's okay, Mr. Chair. But what I will say is that in terms of the data, it's a mixed picture. It's not quite as clear as it appears at first reading. We are clear within the UK that the biggest threat that we face within the UK for counter-terrorism is Islamist extremism, followed by extreme right-wing extremism. And the picture is mixed in the sense that some areas will report higher numbers of extreme right-wing referrals to the Channel programme than Islamist, and some will have higher numbers of Islamists. But we're very clear that our approach through our government's contest strategy, counter-terrorism strategy, is agnostic of ideology or race or any other form of protected characteristic. Rather, it approaches threat and risk in isolation of race and profiling, and looks at those issues in absentia of anything other than threat and risk. And that's why we are seeing far more numbers in some areas of extreme right-wing than perhaps we did a few years ago, because we are looking at purely the issues of threat and risk. I think that covers off. Oh, there was one other one, freedom of association. About double standards of policing against Muslims. I just want to be clear that there is a big difference between how protests are policed and how the media may report how protests are policed. So if you look at the issue of actually how many people were arrested or charged on the recent pro-Palestinian protests versus what the media may be saying about them, there is a big disparity in the two. The overwhelming number of protests were peaceful, and very, very few arrests actually took place. And the rhetoric of the media or politicians is not the way in which politicians actually police them, but rather that's a matter for media to deal with themselves. Thank you. I hope that covers the questions that you asked. I'll pass you on now to my colleague Rob.
Marvellous, thank you, Asim. And then I will pick up from the end, of course, of the Ministry of Justice, so the later part of the criminal justice system. There's two parts I think I need to pick up here. The first is on David Lammy's 2017 review of the criminal justice system. I won't repeat what is in our state report on this, the situation on the recommendations there that we, as it says, we accepted 33, that we have completed almost all of the actions now that we undertook. The ones that are still outstanding are the ones that largely focus on longer-term work, such as developing a more representative senior leadership in the prison service. That's something that takes time to bring people through the ranks, for example. The framework through which we're now working, rather than continuing to update on the Lammy review, is the Inclusive Britain strategy, which we have heard mentioned today on several occasions already. And the most recent update that's available, that I think is publicly available, is the update that was published in spring this year, and that includes a number of actions focused on tackling disparities in the criminal justice system. So that those are the actions currently being taken. In terms specifically of sentencing, if I can put it like that, and the disproportionality in expected sentence for certain offences, particularly between people of different ethnic origins. The first thing to say is that the sentencing framework, the maximum penalties and the sentencing guidelines in England and Wales apply equally to all offenders. And the sentencing guidelines are set by the Independent Sentencing Council for England and Wales, which and courts have a statutory duty to follow the relevant sentencing guidelines. The thing is that you can have the same guidelines applied, but they can then produce disproportionate outcomes. In particular, what tends to lead to that is factors that are taken into account, such as whether the offender has previous convictions and whether an early guilty plea was entered. One of the things that happens in our criminal justice system is that people who wish to plead guilty are incentivised to do so early in the process, rather than right at the end of the case, by a reduction in sentence. And it would seem, as well as other, I should say, relevant to this aggravating and mitigating factors, it would seem in particular that there are real ethnic disparities in those who choose to plead guilty early in proceedings. So that then produces the statistical outcomes that we see, or in part produces the statistical outcomes we see. In terms of tackling this, what we're doing is the Sentencing Council now publishes statistics for each offence by sex, age group and ethnicity, and includes a reference to evidence for any offence specifying those disparities. That also sits alongside something called the Equal Treatment Bench Book, which is a guide to judges to how to make sure they have the equal treatment of all defendants before them. And the idea here is that judges, when making sentencing decisions, are made aware of the inherent biases that may be leading to these disproportionalities in outcome. That's the way we try to balance tackling the issue whilst maintaining the judicial independence on sentencing. I think I am now at this point passing to my colleagues from the devolved administrations and my colleagues from Northern Ireland first.
Just a second, please. We have an ad hoc question from the counter-rapporteur, and as we have, would like to have this interactive way of discussion, I will allow the question of Mr. Kut now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the information, and sorry for interjecting like that, but one very specific thing. Is there a legal definition of Islamophobia in the UK law, so that the courts would be able to properly evaluate charges made by the police? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kut. And also maybe a supplementary question from the co-rapporteur, and we go back directly to the delegation. Ms. Stavrinaki.
Yes, thank you. Not to lose the momentum. Thank you very much, the representative from the Ministry of Justice, for recognizing it was exactly my, the gist of my question. But I wonder, I understand the dependence of the judiciary and the sentencing, etc. But I wonder if data can, how much time will it take for judiciary to be sensitized based on data of sentencing? So I wonder if, positive action in this domain would probably, require for specific guidelines more, let's say, co-decided with the judiciary, in a way, these guidelines, so that, both the independence of the judiciary is respected and also, provide concrete results in sentencing and, and also concrete guidelines on, when people should plead, take the plea, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stavrinaki. Yes, if you could address these issues, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair. I'll address the second of those. I will leave the first, Mr. Kutz's question, to my colleagues, as that's not for me. Yes, but I think is my answer to Ms. Stavrinaki, if I can put it like that. The idea of the Sentencing Council is that it does produce these guidelines that they can't constitute positive action, because each case needs to be adjudicated on its merits. It needs to be assessed fairly. We can't treat a like case differently from a similar case based purely on the ethnicity of the defendant. I think the answer in part here, of course, particularly where there are inherent biases in the judicial decision-making, is, of course, to have a more diverse judiciary. And that is one of the things that still is very much a priority that is left over from the work on the Lamy Review. It's something that is a priority for my new minister in particular. I will note, of course, the first minority ethnic person to hold the role of Lord Chancellor in the United Kingdom as well. And so, therefore, by having a more diverse judiciary, you also, therefore, have a judiciary that better represents the population and is better sensitised to these issues. So it's not about interfering with individual cases, it's about looking at the corpus of decision-making as a whole. I think I'm passing to Lizzie now.
Thank you, Rob. To address Mr. Kutz's question about whether there is a definition of Islamophobia in law, there is not. Anti-Muslim hatred is part of the same legislative framework as for all hate crimes regarding religion and any intersection between religion and race. The previous government had been considering a cross-party definition but did not adopt it, and we don't yet have a position on it. The new UK government does not yet have a position on it. Thank you. May I now invite my colleagues from Northern Ireland to comment on various matters.
Thank you. Mr. Cook mentioned it, but it's important to say that it's relevant context to say that it was indeed following criticism and in response to the review of the police response to the Black Lives Matter protest in 2020 that in Northern Ireland the police service set up the strategic community engagement team. The police service of Northern Ireland hosts regular reference engagement and listening events with communities from across Northern Ireland. The most recent event with stakeholders from ethnic minority communities took place in March 2024 and included a discussion on the PSNI's race action plan currently being developed, which is key to ensuring that the ethnic minority community have an opportunity to feed into its development so that it's fit for purpose when complete. The notes from all of these events are publicly available on the PSNI website. In reference to the use of stop and search powers, these are examined on a regular basis, and use of force and stop and search powers are reviewed on a regular basis by the Police Service for Northern Ireland. The PSNI holds service accountability panel meetings which provide community-focused scrutiny regarding the use of policing powers. And the PSNI frequently tasks in-depth research to be carried out regarding the use of police powers on particular sections of the Northern Ireland community. And when complete, these are presented to a service accountability panel. The PSNI indeed has recently completed a number of studies relating to the use of stop and search powers on members of the Irish traveller community. All stop and search counters must be recorded on body-worn video footage when such a device is worn by the searching officer. Under guidance issued last year, police supervisors are also review a sample of stop and search body-worn footage. This includes reviewing a sample of footage for use of force, traffic stops, stop and search, and domestic incidents, and the guidance for that is kept under constant review. At the Service Accountability Panel meeting in June 2024, it was noted that during 2023-24, the average monthly usage of body-worn video had been 92%, and that the trend for usage over the period had been steady, and it increased 3 percentage points on the same period the previous year. Reflecting on protests, I mean, all significant policing activity in Northern Ireland, should that be the policing of events, protests, and indeed search activity, is routinely accompanied by a detailed community impact assessment. This allows for a careful consideration of the potential impact of the police activity and how it can be managed and mitigated. We have particular arrangements around accountability for the Police Service of Northern Ireland. We have the Northern Ireland Policing Board, the Office of the Police Ombudsman, and policing and community safety partnerships at a local level that provide scrutiny of the police service's actions. Thank you.
Thank you. In relation to the questions on the Scottish Government and the next steps that we are taking in relation to the race equality framework and the strategy, we are considering what this should be and look to engage with a range of stakeholders next month so that we can begin co-producing a shared strategic vision to build a fairer Scotland. We have, however, are in the position of having a short-term anti-racism interim governance group which was set up to develop anti-racism infrastructure, and this was established in April 2022 and made recommendations on the establishment of the Anti-Racism Observatory. This is a significant step forward in how the Scottish Government is tackling structural racism. Although its functions are yet to be finalised, it is anticipated that they will include community and co-production, skills building, accountability, a repository of anti-racism related policies and initiatives, data and research, partnerships, public narrative and cultural engagement, and advocacy to advocate for power redistribution on decision making and to be a champion for competent education and understanding of anti-racism. Once implemented, it is anticipated that the Observatory will focus on developing strategic partnerships across all sectors to collaboratively embed anti-racism change. And this includes working collectively with third sector organisations to ensure lived experience and co-production are at the heart of driving meaningful change for diverse communities across Scotland. We do recognise that to effectively address racial inequality and racism, it is crucial that we have robust accountability mechanisms and oversight in place, and that we measure and evidence outcomes and progress. In relation to Gypsy travellers, I'll pick up on 2 points. One which is a question about what practical steps we're taking with this group, and the second being the evidence in relation to police and prisoners. So the Scottish Government published a Gypsy Traveller Action Plan in October 2019, which set out concrete steps for improving outcomes for Gypsy travellers, which consisted of 33 actions across areas such as accommodation, health, education and non-discrimination, and the plan expired in 2023. Our initial findings show that good progress has been made in most areas. We then undertook a listening exercise with Gypsy travellers to understand what their priorities are in order to develop the next phase of this, and we aim to publish the new action plan at the end of summer 2024 with new targeted, specific and measurable actions. So data is not currently published on the number of Gypsy travellers and Roma people in the criminal justice system, but a review of data on ethnicity in the justice system in Scotland, published in 2023, suggested that, in general, the number of people from minority ethnic groups is broadly representative of the wider population. And a final note on policing. Police Scotland is delivering a substantial programme of work aimed at transforming its culture enhancing recruitment, leadership and training to develop a culture which reflects its values of integrity, fairness, respect and commitment to upholding human rights. And as a result of the review, which was referenced earlier, the Chief Constable established a standing independent review group to provide critical oversight of equality matters. This review group will deliver its final report to the Scottish Police Authority by the end of this month, and following from that, further actions will be taken. And in relation to AI and policing, on live facial recognition, the Police Scotland and the Scottish Biometrics Commissioner are undertaking a public consultation of its use in coming year to make sure if it is adopted in Scotland, then its use is proportionate and ethical. And I will pass to my colleagues in the Welsh Government.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Riaz Hassan from Welsh Government. I'll be coming to answer two questions from Mr. Coot with regards to the updated information on the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan, and then I'll be covering the representation. With regards to the latest information, we have published the plan, as you know, in June 2022. We then published the first annual report last December, shows the impact of the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. The Senate Equality in Social Justice Inquiry undertaken to check the implementation of our plan and provided 10 recommendations, which we are currently considering. We are embedding the last 2 years' learning and undertaking a review of the plan, so there will be refreshed goals and actions, which we will be publishing in this autumn. We are also undertaking a governance structure review, which will be completed the same time. With regards to our external accountability group, they have asked all our policies area to prioritize implication of their specific policies area on themes such as leadership, data, Gypsy Roma traveller, intersectionality, positive action in how we can strengthen the complaint system. We are also establishing 4 regional forums to directly engage our ethnic minority peoples and to be accountable to them to check if they see a visible and tangible difference in their lived experiences. In terms of the monitoring and the impact of the plan, there is Disparity Evidence Unit. They're developing the impact framework, which will ensure the measurement and the impact of the plan, not just inside the Welsh Government, but is for the wider public sector. They will be publishing this impact framework in autumn. In terms of the representation, the Welsh Government co-fund with the National Lottery the Equal Power, Equal Voice mentoring program, and that is specifically to increase the diversity of representation in public and political life in Wales. The program is available to any person who's age 18 or over living in Wales who identify as Black, Asian and ethnic minority person. The initiative been very, very successful. I'll be more than happy to share some data on this, but this initiative increased the people who participated, their confidence from 20% to 81%. And there are other initiatives in terms of board representation, but I'm conscious of the time. Thank you.
I thank the delegation for their replies. I will now open the floor for brief follow-up questions by country rapporteurs and other members of the committee, as well as replies from the delegation. We can allocate 2 minutes for each question, and this phase will take 35 minutes overall. I first give the floor to the rapporteurs, and the list of speakers is open. I have Mr. Amir, Mr. Yuen, Ms. Shepherd on my list, and Mr. Diaby. The list and Ms. Lakula. List is open. Mr. Kut, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for all the extra information that was provided by the members of the delegation. I'm going to raise one issue that I had in my list, but didn't have time last time. The Windrush Scandal. The Windrush generation, those who arrived in the UK from Caribbean countries between 1948 and 73. They were British subjects, free to permanently live and work in the UK. They were affected by the government's hostile environment legislation in 2012, which tasked landlords, banks, employers, and many others with enforcing immigration control, especially for undocumented migrants. In 2017, it appeared that hundreds of Commonwealth citizens, mostly of Black Caribbean heritage, including many from the Windrush generation, had been systematically wrongly detained, denied legal rights, including the right to work and access NHS healthcare services, and in many cases deported. In 2020, an independent report, the Windrush Lessons Learned Review, was published with 30 recommendations. But the recommendations from the review, it appears, have only been partially implemented by the UK government. Now, apparently, according to the information that we receive, there is a general agreement that it was something that should never have happened. So nobody contests that. The problem is, there are information that people continue to face serious difficulties accessing the complex and inaccessible Windrush compensation scheme meant to remedy losses and negative impacts on people's lives with legal aid unavailable to claimants. What is the latest situation on that? What are the plans to redress the wrongs that everybody agrees were committed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kut. Ms. Stavrinaki, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to raise another issue that was also discussed in the report by the working group of experts on people of African descent. Because on the one hand, we discussed these guidelines on sentencing, and on the other hand, we have information on the outcome of joint enterprise prosecutions and the disproportionate impact on young male people of African, persons of African descent. And the new figures show that black people, I quote, are 16 times more likely to be prosecuted under these laws. So we understand that, this is exactly what, the problem of the outcome of these practices can be the breach of racial discrimination, because it creates, it perpetuates, it establishes like a channel where people are introduced and then they cannot, they cannot leave this problematic, path that leads them to criminal justice system. And so guidelines for judiciary cannot combat this issue. Thank you very much for your comments, and thank you very much for your answers so far and for this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stavrinaki. We'll now proceed to brief questions from other members of the committee. The first speaker is Mr. Amir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me 2 minutes. Talking again on a subject which is, in my view, in the view also of history, that England must recognize the crime which has been done in 1947 when not recognizing in conformity of the Council of Tutelle of the United Nations at the time. And it happened here, in the place we are meeting today, where our committee is meeting. It happened here. What happened? The Council of Tutelle decided to organize, to tell England to organize a council, to organize a right for the domination and perhaps get to independence. It happened that Sykes-Picot talks, which were confidential, which happened in Paris after the fall of the empire of Muslims in the Middle East. What happened? It happened that the independence or right of self-determination has not been offered to the Palestinian people. All of the countries, Arab countries, have been got independence, but Palestine. So what happened? It happened that until today, the Palestinians have no people, no land, nothing, just people getting around the world without any spirit to come back somehow, someday, to their country. So, what I'm asking, Mr. Chair, is that England must accept to repair the fault which has been done at that time and see an issue which will give honor and dignity to Palestinians. So, here we are. We have been talking about terrorism.
Yes, Mr. Amir, but we need to move forward.
I'm finishing. Okay, you are right, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Amir. Please note we are discussing the implementation of the convention in the United Kingdom contemporarily. And we take interest in your, of course, in your responses. Mr. Yuen, your next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my address will concern the issues of the Chagosian. So paragraph 22 of the list of themes requests the state party to inform this committee on the measures adopted by the state party to withdraw all discriminatory restrictions on the Chagosians from entering Diego Garcia and other islands in the Chagos, and to hold full and meaningful consultations to facilitate their return to their islands and to provide them with an effective remedy, including compensation. In February 2019, the ICJ found that the excision of the Chagos from the territory of Mauritius shortly before the latter was granted its independence was illegal, and that the Chagosian who had been removed therefrom to make place for a military base had the right to return. In May 2019, the UN General Assembly welcomed that judgment and granted the delay of some months for UK to implement the decision. Neither the UK nor the US seems to have made any significant move to comply with their international obligations. The response of the state party at paragraphs 262 to 265 of the present report is unsatisfactory. While expressing its regret at the way the Chagosians have been treated in relation to their removal from the Chagos, there is no proposal for any measure of reparation. In 2022, UK passed a law whereby it offered British passports and citizenship to the Chagosians living in Mauritius. A few Chagosians flew to Crawley, United Kingdom, hoping they would have a better life. And of the latest influx of some 77 Chagosians who arrived at Gatwick Airport in June this year, only 40 were provided with accommodation. The remaining 37 who did not qualify had to be sheltered in a rest center. Another group was reported to be living in tents pitched on a former car park. Questioned by the media, a representative of the Chagosians stated that given the option, the Chagosians would choose going back to live in the Chagos. So could the delegation inform if the UK intends to comply with the recommendations of the committee regarding the right of return of the Chagosians to their homes in the Chagos, which comprises some 60 islands? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Yuen. The next speaker is Ms. Shepherd.
Thank you very much, Chair, and may I welcome back the delegation, the head of delegation, and all in attendance today. So my first question also relates to the theme for today that speaks to the Windrush issue. Of course, it's of much concern still, and I know the concerns about violations have been already outlined by the country rapporteur. But I observe that paragraphs 3 and 4 of the State Party report mention the Williams Review of 2020, led by Wendy Williams, which the State Party indicates has been crucial in implementing evidence-based measures to improve outcomes for ethnic minorities. However, the recent High Court judicial review in July 2024 found that the Home Office had indirectly discriminated against Windrush victims in violation of Article 14 of the European Convention on Human Rights due to its decision to abandon plans for Migrants Commissioner. In response to this finding, what steps will the State Party take, or what steps are being taken to address this issue? And will the State Party consider establishing a commissioner specifically focused on the Windrush Scandal and the shortcomings of the compensation scheme? And my second question, Chair, I place under special measures, list of themes, paragraph 11, as the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent was designed to encourage special measures to improve the conditions of people of African descent in the state, in various states parties, in all our states parties actually. So in regard to one of the standard paragraphs of the committee, which we stated in the last concluding observations relating to the UN International Decade for People of African Descent, which ends at the end of this year, by the way, did the State Party launch the decade officially as encouraged by the program of activities? What were some of the unrealized aspects of the program of activities for the International Decade, in your view? Would the State Party be willing to support the implementation of a second decade as that's being called for now? And what would you regard as your main priority for that second decade? I'm speaking it into being, so I'm saying when it is declared. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shepherd. And the next speaker on my list is Ms. Lakula.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning to the delegation. Welcome back, and to everyone in the room. And I will be raising my questions as the follow-up rapporteur to engage the State Party on the recommendations that the committee made in the follow-up paragraphs, and also in the paragraphs dealing with issues of particular importance. I'll start with counter-terrorism measures. And the recommendation that the committee made was that the State Party should review the anti-terrorism legislation and its counter-terrorism strategy and their impact on ethnic and ethno-religious groups protected by the Convention. And in the current report, you have stated that the review of the strategy took place in 2018. Can you please provide us with update on the implementation of the recommendations that were made by the review panel? Ms. Shepherd has raised issues regarding the International Decade of People of African Descent, but I have a specific question, and the question in this regard, following up on the recommendations that the committee made, is whether the Inclusive Britain Action Plan and the racial equality strategy in Northern Ireland and the anti-racist Wales action plan, do these action plans specifically deal with discrimination against people of African descent? The other questions, I think the last one, Chair, that I have is on the Gypsies, Romas and Travellers. And as far as England is concerned, in the responses given by the State Party, we are provided with information on travel sites for the travellers, no information on provision of housing for the Romas and the Gypsies in England. And in Northern Ireland, the Irish Travellers Accommodation Strategy 2021 and 2020 to 2026 is now halfway. And what I want to find out is whether you have done a mid-term evaluation of the strategy, and if you did so, what are the results of that evaluation? Also, we have not been provided with any information regarding the provision of health or discrimination in health and employment against the Gypsies, Roma, and travelers in the report. I will appreciate if this information can be provided to us. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Ms. Takula. The next speaker will be Mr. Sibande. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. I hope I manage within 2 minutes. Being my first time to speak to the delegation, I would like also to welcome the delegation to this interactive dialogue. My first question refers to some of the responses yesterday. A couple of times the delegation referred to the point that there's a new government in UK. I just want the delegation to clarify that point, because when there was a response to do with the sports, the response was that we are not sure if this new government would want to legislate in that area. However, looking at the convention, this convention is supposed to stand whether there is a new government or no new government. So when the responses are saying there's a new government, it makes the committee a bit worried that where there will be a commitment. So I just want a clarification from the delegation with this reference to the new government. The second issue is that I want the delegation, or the committee would want the delegation, to give a little bit more update on how the UK government has been making sure that the convention is being implemented and supported in areas supported by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. I understand that the British government provides support to many countries in the area of human rights, but we would want the committee to be updated on how the UK government has made sure that problems of discrimination among ethnic groups in different countries that are being supported by the British are being addressed. It's at the same point that I would want the delegation to reflect on the position of the UK government when it relates to Commonwealth. It says that according to the British government, on the information that it has published, the UK government works with the Commonwealth Secretariat to ensure that the Commonwealth is able to promote democratic principles and human rights. I would want the delegation to update the committee on the initiatives and programs that have been led by the UK government to make sure that the issues of discrimination against ethnic groups in different Commonwealth countries have been addressed. On the same point, I would want the delegation to speak more, because under the paragraph 93 of the State Party report, not much information has been given on the British overseas territories. So when we look at the information that is available, it says that the UK government retains responsibility on defense, foreign relations, internal security, and the ultimate responsibility of good governance. Therefore, the delegation should update the committee on the programs that have been initiated in these British overseas territories, making sure that the convention is implemented and then issues of discrimination are being addressed, especially by ethnic minorities in those British overseas territories. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sibande. Now Mr. Diaby, then Mr. Bia. Mr. Diaby.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to thank the delegation for their replies so far. Two small, short questions, Chair. Would the delegation mind providing additional information on the measures that they have taken or plan on taking to commemorate the decade of people of African descent? Thinking about measures for reparative justice over everything that could have happened. Additionally, Second point, would the delegation mind providing more information on measures seeking to redress the forced assimilation of Cigano, the travellers, in Scottish society, and to ensure that the victims and the families are part of all initiatives seeking to provide a solution to the situation? Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to the delegation, since this is the first time that I am taking the floor. I have one or two questions on racial discrimination in the workplace. And you notice perhaps that I hesitated to raise my hand because I'm not sure if it's at this point that I may be able to raise that question. If it's not, then I will ask the question later on.
Mr. Guisset, a very short question, yes, referring to this segment. Please, Mr. Guisset.
Thank you very much, Chair. It is about this, but as you know, things are moving fast. Well, first, I would like to thank the delegation. This is also the first time that I'm taking the floor. I wanted to speak earlier, but I believe the Chair didn't see my nameplate. And I wanted to thank you for this very dynamic dialogue. And also thank civil society for their significant participation, always clarifying and edifying. A comment about a question I had the day before yesterday when we met with civil society. Overall, we can note in the United Kingdom some trends. The regularization of xenophobia, some hate speech with consequences that we all know, and also what I might call the liberalization of racist remarks. But what is concerning is that we might say that the UK is perceived as a model for inclusiveness when compared to other Republican models. There's a greater level of pluralism, and that is quite visible. And if we look at the current situation, because it is relevant to look at the previous situation to know where we are coming from. And I was saying the day before yesterday that Brexit was seen by some as an issue. And after Brexit in 2022, we could see that there were some laws about minorities. And we know where that led to with the deportation of several or many migrants. So given that we have an opportunity to have political representatives here, what exactly is the responsibility of public actors? I'm speaking here about men and women who are in charge, and also the media. What are the responsibilities of the political leaders? Because we do see these trends trying to regularize xenophobia and hate speech at the political level. So what are some preventive actions that are being taken? Especially that I'm interested in knowing. What preventive actions are being taken to avoid that situation from rising? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Guisset. Well, let's add a bit of additional time to the delegation so that they could have 20 minutes, please, in total. My second remark is that some questions referred to the next segment, and we will deal with economic, social, cultural rights in the context of ethnic minorities after the short break. So if the delegation thinks they could provide answers to these questions later, that's all right. So please provide replies that are possible to provide in 20 minutes. And if something requires additional feedback or retrieve data, just as previously, we may also receive information in writing. Without further delay, I give you the floor. Ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to every committee member for a lot of very wide-ranging and thoughtful questions. So thank you for the additional time, because I think we will need it. Just to address a point which was raised and which was raised at yesterday's session about the fact that we have a new government and that in some places our position on certain matters has not yet been confirmed by those new ministers. I would just like to reiterate that our new government's party manifesto said multilateral institutions remain indispensable and committed to uphold human rights and international law. So all considerations of the particular matters will be done within that framework, and that was a commitment made by the new government. So now I've addressed that point, I will invite my colleague Ms Nugent from our Home Office to begin with questions regarding Windrush and other matters. Thank you.
Thank you. So starting with the questions on Windrush, for which thanks, we're committed to putting right the injustices and making sure that those affected receive the compensation that they rightly deserve. And we're celebrating the enormous contribution of the Windrush generation and their descendants, for example, our Windrush Day and various activities that we have run in recent years, including a national Windrush monument and various bits around sort of education linked to that. Work to deliver the commitments made following the Windrush events continues. The Windrush status and compensation schemes will remain open as long as is necessary to ensure that those affected can apply for and receive the documents that they need to confirm their status and the compensation, as I've said, that they rightly deserve. Up to the end of June 2024, the Home Office has paid out over 92.14 million in compensation across 2,577 claims, and enhancements have been made to those schemes following engagement with those affected and advisors to reduce the amount of time for preliminary assessment, bringing it back down to 4 months, and making sure that we have the ability to provide compensation at the earliest possible opportunity. We're also introducing single points of contact with single caseworkers as well to improve that experience for those individuals who are engaging with those schemes. Just to absolutely affirm, there is no end date to those schemes, and there is no cap on the amount of compensation that is to be awarded, and I hope that provides some reassurance. There was a question around legal aid. Just to confirm that the legal aid legislation was amended to ensure that claimants under the scheme are not disadvantaged in applying for legal aid because of any payments made under that scheme. I think it's important to mention as well, as sort of in the context of plans to address wrongs committed, it's important to ensure that these wrongs are not repeated. And following the Wendy Williams Lessons Learned review, lots of activity has been taken. There was mention of those, all the recommendations. In terms of the compliant environment measures, I direct the committee to a series of documents that were published in February last year, which include review of evidence, but also an equality impacts assessment. I note a number of the comments this morning have referred to the importance of evidence and impact, so I direct the committee to those. In addition, various safeguards have been put in place, and those include additional checks when sharing data, making it easier for people to evidence their status, extra training for our caseworkers so they can understand and deal sensitively with individual circumstances, early intervention to support vulnerable people, and making it much easier to contact the Home Office and resolve issues when they do arise. Finally, there was a question around the Migrant Commissioner. As noted, the previous government made a decision to drop this recommendation from the Wendy Williams Lessons Learned review, and there was the recent High Court judgment that ruled that that was unlawful. The government will be considering next steps in light of that judgment in relation to the Migrant Commissioner, but I'm not able to provide a further update on that specifically now. I'm going to pass to my colleague from the Home Office, Asim. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm going to pick up the question on counter-terrorism review and implementation of our review recommendations. And I'm going to, at the same time, apologise, Mr. Abernathy, I missed out a question that you had earlier on prevent relating to teachers and the prevent duty, so I'll try and pick the two of those up together, if I might. So on the review itself, our counter-terrorism strategy contest was refreshed and relaunched in July 2023, and the Prevent strategy was reviewed in February and published a review in February 2023 as well. Government at the time accepted all 34 recommendations of the Prevent review and has begun implementation of those recommendations. Contest, as I said, was refreshed as a strategy overall in July 2023, and that continues to be monitored and reviewed. Overall, we do continue to review on a regular basis the processes that allow us to conduct our contest strategy, and especially Prevent. And with that in mind, your question around the Prevent duty on teachers and other public sector workers, it's one of those areas where we constantly review what's taking place in that arena. And at the present time, there are no plans to remove the Prevent duty. In fact, there are plans to bolster the training so that people can be better equipped to make solid referrals, more robust referrals, which can then lead to the appropriate support and intervention being provided for people who are vulnerable should they need it. I hope that can answer your question, and I will pass you on to my colleague, Dominic.
Thank you, Asim. So I will pick up Mr. Lakula's question about the Inclusive Britain Action Plan and whether it applies specifically to people of African descent. The strategy is broader than that. It tackles ethnic disparities in the round, but there are specific actions which target people of African descent. So, for example, there are measures around reducing maternal health disparities, particularly for black women. There's an action around increasing the number of black children who are adopted, and there's also an action around tackling hair discrimination in schools for black children in particular. So I think that answers the question. I'm now going to pass to my colleague, David Grocott from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office.
Thank you very much. My name is David Grocott. I wanted to respond to the questions from Mr. Sik-Yun and Mr. Darby. So first of all, Mr. Sik-Yun, on the question about Chagosians. First, let me say that the manner in which Chagosians were removed from the Chagos archipelago in the 1960s and early 1970s and treated thereafter was wrong. As set out in our State Party report, successive UK governments have expressed their deep regret over it. There are now no permanent inhabitants on the British Indian Ocean Territory, and the law prohibiting permanent settlement applies equally to all people. On the issue of compensation, the UK agreed a full and final compensation settlement with Chagosians in the 1980s. This followed a previous payment made to Mauritius to support Chagosians who were settled there. English courts and the European Court of Human Rights have rejected further Chagosian claims for compensation. On the ICJ advisory opinion, the UK began negotiations on the exercise of sovereignty over the British Indian Ocean Territory with Mauritius in late 2022. Following the recent UK election, the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary met the Mauritian Prime Minister and committed to continuing negotiations. It is too early to speculate on timelines or conclusions, but it is the government's priority to resolve this long-standing and important issue, including ensuring the long-term, secure and effective operation of the UK-US military base on Diego Garcia. We recognise the future of the islands, including resettlement, is an important issue for many Chagosians. However, we cannot comment on the future administration of the territory while these negotiations are underway. And then finally, turning to the issue of Chagosians who have moved to the UK in recent months, all British citizens, including those of Chagosian origin, are entitled to the same support, and the UK government is working closely with local authorities who are assisting new arrivals. The UK remains committed to providing support to Chagosians wherever they live. In financial year 2023-24, the UK spent £440,000 on projects to benefit Chagosians in the UK and Mauritius. And then just turning to Mr. Darby's question on the overseas territories more generally. So the United Kingdom's relationship with its overseas territories is a modern one, based on partnership. Powers are devolved to the governments of the OTs to the maximum extent possible, consistent with the UK retaining those powers necessary to discharge its sovereign responsibilities. All inhabited British overseas territories have constitutional protections against discrimination, including on the grounds of race, and the UK provides financial and technical support to the overseas territories to help them deliver on those obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. I will pick up a couple of the FCDO-specific questions. Firstly, regarding the international decade, previously we have reiterated the importance of the international decade for people of African descent, which we saw as a reaffirmation of the international community's collective commitment to advancing racial equality for everyone and to build a more equitable future for future generations. We do understand that there is a push for a further decade to be elaborated, and we'll obviously look at this very closely with our new ministers at how this develops, and we'll examine how this may interact with the policy frameworks in the UK. Regarding human rights more generally, our chair's already made some very good comments on this. The new government has committed to put the protection of human rights around the world at the heart of what we do. We'll work with our allies to encourage all states to uphold their international human rights obligations and to hold those who violate or abuse human rights to account. And this includes a number of initiatives and programs with the Commonwealth Secretariat. And in Commonwealth countries, indeed. I don't really have much time, but regarding specific human rights programs, the Foreign Secretary has spoken about putting the rule of law at the heart of the government's approach. The FCDO has worked through the Rule of Law Expertise Programme to promote and strengthen the rule of law in developing countries by providing high-quality pro bono legal and judicial expertise to support partnerships with governments, NGOs, local law firms and the judiciary. And examples of this include a judicial training programme in Nigeria, for example. But if further information is sought by the committee regarding specific human rights programmes, then we can certainly follow up in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll pick up the question in relation to the Northern Ireland Racial Equality Strategy and people of African descent. The strategy covers all ethnic minorities, including people of African descent. One of the commitments of the strategy was to establish a racial equality subgroup as the voice of minority ethnic people at the heart of the Northern Ireland Government. The subgroup comprises representation of member organisations who support people of African and Asian descent. A number of specific actions were taken by the Northern Ireland Executive to mark contributions towards the International Decade for People of African Descent. One such action was to erect a monument of Frederick Douglass in Belfast to honour the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. Thank you. I'll pass to Scottish colleagues.
Thank you. I will pick up the question in relation to the treatment of Gypsy traveller community. The Scottish Government recognises that historical policies have had an impact on the Gypsy traveller communities in Scotland. An independent research was commissioned by the Government and is underway to establish a timeline of events, decisions and rules. We expect to receive the independent research findings in September. We will engage fully with people affected once the archival research is complete, and this will include giving community members the opportunity to share their own experiences. We will consider our next steps after then. We should be in a position to publish findings before the end of this year. We know that there are a range of different views on the matter from speaking to members of the community, and the Scottish Government remains focused on working together across political, organisational and geographical boundaries to deliver actions to address the ongoing inequality and injustice that Gypsy traveller communities face. And I'll pass to my colleague in the Welsh Government.
Thanks very much. I'll be directly answering the question around African descent and their engagement in the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. Our Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan co-produced with Black, Asian and minority ethnic people who have led the discussion at all levels to directly inform the goals and actions. Our chair of the External Accountability Group, and the Accountability Group is the group who held the Welsh Government and others to account, and the chair is of African descent. He is the most senior professor in Cardiff University. Our first equality advisor to the Minister for Social Justice previously was of African descent. We have 8 members of the External Accountability Group, and they are of African descent. We are engaging a number of organizations, engaging people of African descent in our Wales Race Forum, which is chaired by the Cabinet Secretary for Culture and Social Justice. And I'll just quickly run through the engagement of the Gypsy Roma traveller. There are many actions within the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan, and we do recognize the deep inequalities they face. We're providing a total of 11 million to local authorities in 23-24, while the minority ethnic Gypsy Roma traveller grant, and that mainly to support children and young people according to their needs. And my last point is, to date, the value of the contract that we have provided to Travelling Ahead, an initiative delivering advice, advocacy support to Gypsy Roma traveller, is about 1.2 million. Thank you.
There we go. Chair, I just wanted, as we've got a little time available, to come back to two things that Ms Stavronaki mentioned. The first, in one of her follow-up remarks, she talked about joint enterprise, which is a doctrine in our law, secondary offences, where people who assist or encourage the commission of offences with the intent that that offence takes place may be prosecuted alongside those who have been held responsible for the offence itself. And we were talking about racial disparities in that regard. I wanted to emphasise a couple of things. The first is that joint enterprise itself is a perfectly legitimate part of our law. It is a necessary part of our law that these secondary offences are prosecuted and people are held responsible for that. The challenge in this respect is not so much one of sentencing, which I think was possibly the context we were discussing it in, but one of prosecution. Because there were concerns about this, and Ms Stavronaki referred to them, the Crown Prosecution Service for England and Wales, which is our prosecutorial function, piloted the collection of data on joint enterprise homicide prosecutions. They did find that there are some ethnic disparities in that, but it was a relatively small sample size. It was 190 cases involving 680 defendants. So at this stage, we can't draw strong conclusions from that. What they have, though, done, because that is a matter of concern nonetheless, is updated their case management system and started a full national monitoring scheme this year. They've held some panels with stakeholders to seek feedback on these findings. One of those focused, for example, on cases where evidence of gang association is a feature. And they've updated their guidance because, of course, the perception that particularly youths from minority ethnic backgrounds are more involved in gangs is the issue there. So to challenge that. And they've updated their guidance on gang-related offending as well, including how so-called drill music is used in consultation with stakeholders. I also just wanted to pick up something very quickly that I didn't manage to answer from Ms Stavronaki's first round of questions because it took me time to research it. In the context of the Lamy review, Ms Stavronaki asked specifically what's happening with the drug diversion schemes mentioned in paragraph 183 of our State Party report. These are being delivered through the context of a programme I think my Home Office colleagues leading on largely called Project ADDA, which is a whole system response to combating drug misuse that's being piloted in the 13 hardest hit areas across England and Wales. It's a strategy that uses coordinated law enforcement activity, expanded diversionary programmes, trying to use the criminal justice system to divert people away from drug offending. I won't give full details of it now, but information on what is happening with that is available in the spring update on the Inclusive Britain strategy from a couple of months ago that we've referred to a few times. Thank you, Chair. Sorry.
Thank you very much, everyone in the delegation, for those responses. I'll just note that there were a couple of questions about health education and accommodation of Gypsy, Roma and Traveller people, which we, according to the Chair's advice, suggest that we cover in the next session to do that in greater depth. There was a question about action taken to address statements by politicians, which I believe we covered at yesterday's session, but we can return to that if that would be helpful. I would like to just take up Mr. Grease's invitation to reflect on the progress of the past few decades. I think it's fair to say that we are proud that we are going in the right direction according to the evidence that we are gathering, but we recognise that there is still much more to do to ensure that everyone is that we live in a society that is free from racial discrimination in all of its fields, and that's why we're very proud to be here today to have this dialogue and to be held to account for that.
I thank you for your responses. This brings to an end segment 3. We will now break to stretch our legs for, say, maximum 10 minutes. We will resume in 11:40. We will resume now. May I ask you to take your seats? We will proceed with segment 4. Yes, that's segment 4, the last segment of our dialogue. I give the floor to the country rapporteur and co-rapporteur, who will put questions followed by replies from the delegation. I'm sure the rapporteur is around. I wonder if you would start with Madam Co-Rapporteur, or okay, if possible, then. All right. In this case, I would now give the floor to the country Co-Rapporteur, Ms. Stavrinaki.
Thank you, Chair. So, I discussed the issue of healthcare and ethnic minorities, list of themes, paragraph 19. The committee welcomes the state parties' recognition of ongoing inequalities in access to healthcare services, the disparate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the color of COVID-19. However, it remains concerned about the current condition of the NHS and the adverse effects of austerity measures on people of African descent and ethnic minorities. Please update the committee on the steps taken, not those that we already know in the report, steps taken and outcomes to combat structural inequalities, in particular on measures to ensure timely, culturally acceptable, gender-responsive and quality healthcare services, including mental health care for persons belonging to ethnic minorities, Gypsies, Roma, travelers, people of African descent, as well as migrants, asylum seekers and refugees. Does the state party collect data on physical and mental health care services disaggregated by ethnicity, gender and age? Please update us on measures to combat and eliminate the determinants affecting the persons protected by the Convention, such as inadequate housing, poor indoor and outdoor air quality, other environmental hazards, causing, increasing and exacerbating risks of respiratory and other illnesses, also obesity, but also food insecurity and mental health risks due to over-policing and over-representation in prisons. As the state party knows, the committee will adopt soon a general recommendation on the right to health, number 37, and in this general recommendation, we take a comprehensive approach, not only, providing guidance on healthcare services, but also on how to establish a public health system which takes into account the risk factors and the needs of persons protected under the Convention. The committee expressed also its concerns on global health disparities in its decision on the lack of equitable and non-discriminatory access to COVID-19 vaccines. Does the state party consider waiving intellectual property rights under the TRIPS agreement or taking other measures to address the lack of equitable and non-discriminatory access to COVID-19 vaccines and other necessary medicine and preventative health products? While welcoming the information in paragraphs 52 to 56 of the State Party report and the follow-up information, the committee would like to know more on the outcome of the measures addressing the overrepresentation of Afro-Caribbean descent in psychiatric institutions and the disproportionate use of restraint, seclusion and medication. It is reported that until March 2023, black, I quote, people in England were 3.5 times as likely as white people to be detained under the Mental Health Act 1983 and 8 times more likely to be placed on a community treatment order. Does the state party collect data by ethnicity on restraint by health boards? Please update the committee on the reform of the Mental Health Act and provide information on measures and guarantees against racial discrimination. The immigration health surcharge also raises serious concern of disproportionate burden put on foreign nationals applying to live in the UK on a temporary basis, which started in 2015 at £200 per person per year and rose up currently at £1,035 for most relevant individuals, while they still need to pay for certain types of services. Please update the committee on data proving that these measures do not negatively affect universal access to healthcare. I now pass to infant and maternal mortality and environmental and climate change issues. Higher infant and maternal mortality among ethnic minorities are still a public health concern. In 2022, maternal mortality rates for black women were 3 times higher than for white women in the UK. What steps have been taken to identify the root causes, decrease the maternal mortality rate for women of African descent and ethnic minorities, including in prisons and other spaces of deprivation of liberty? In a joint communication, special procedures mandate holders expressed their concern in relation to the violation of the human rights of members of indigenous peoples and communities in Peru, in Singapore, in Uganda, in Liberia, in Portugal, involving corporations whose parent companies are based in the state party. What measures have been taken to prevent overseas activities of transnational corporations registered in the state party that could have adverse effects on the enjoyment of human rights by local populations, in particular indigenous peoples and ethnic groups, including in areas affected by conflicts? And please update the committee on cases in which these corporations have been held accountable for human rights violations of persons protected by the Convention. I now pass to social care. The independent review of children's social care concluded, I quote, that alongside socioeconomic inequality, racial inequalities are amongst the most pronounced disparities in children's social care. Children from black and mixed ethnic groups are generally overrepresented in child protection statistics. The most significant overrepresentation is seen also among white, Irish, travel, Roma, and Gypsy children, around 4 times the share of the all from 0 to 17 years old. The Department for Education Research highlights disparities in child protection interventions across different ethnic groups. Specifically, it found that 65% of white children and 62% of mixed children, and I quote, this is why I use the terminology used by the state party and not by the committee, who entered care had previously been on a child protection plan. In contrast, only 39% of black children and 36% of Asian children had such plans before entering care. This suggests potential inequities in the provision of early support and intervention, with black and Asian children potentially being less likely to receive help before their situation escalates. Further research shows that black and mixed heritage boys are less likely to be referred to early health services and may not receive adequate support from child and adolescent mental health services before becoming involved in the criminal justice system. What steps has the state party taken to increase early protection plans before entering care to address the disproportionate representation of children of African descent and also children of white Irish travelers, Roma and Gypsy children in the care system, and to ensure their adequate support in line with their cultural heritage and the protection against marginalization? My last point is on education. The race disparity audit reveals that pupils from Gypsy, Roma, Irish traveler backgrounds had the lowest, and I'm sorry, I don't want to strengthen the stereotyping, but we need to, to talk about specific data to understand how racial discrimination operates. So it reveals that pupils from Gypsy, Roma, and Irish traveler backgrounds had the lowest levels of attainment and progress and were the least likely to continue their education beyond the age of 16. While pupils from the Black ethnic group generally made more progress than the national average, Black Caribbean pupils lagged behind. Additionally, Gypsy Roma children and Irish travel children had the highest rates of both temporary and permanent exclusions in England. In secondary schools, more than half of Irish traveller pupils and 45% of Gypsy Roma pupils experienced fixed-period exclusions. In special schools, these exclusions affected 51.24% of Irish traveller pupils and 31.94% of Black Caribbean pupils. So what measures have been implemented to address the economic disadvantages and the structural disadvantages affecting educational progress of racial and ethnic communities, and to combat bullying and stereotypes inside and outside the classroom that undermine Gypsy, Roma, and traveller children, and of course, children of African descent? Additionally, what steps have been taken to increase the representation of teachers from racial and ethnic minority communities? And with this question, this segment from my part is completing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Stavrinaki. Mr. Kut. Thank you, Chair. I will start with issues related to poverty, employment, housing and homelessness, healthcare and infant and maternal mortality, and education related to ethnic minorities, Gypsies, Roma and travelers, people of African and Asian descent, migrants, asylum seekers and refugees. Now, we have reports that ethnic minorities and members of other historically marginalized groups face disproportionately higher risks of poverty, of becoming homeless, have poorer access to health care, experience higher rates of infant mortality, and substantial differences remain in their participation in the labor market. We are also aware from the state party's periodic report and other sources of information of the policies, plans of actions, programs and other activities in the UK in general and in devolved governments in particular, and they are welcome. However, the committee needs assurances as to commitment, continuation, improvements, impact assessment, evaluation, and review and revision in these policies, plans of actions, programs, and other activities. This is the general area of information and assurances that we need. In terms of particular situations, especially the situation of Gypsy, Roma, and traveller ethnic group, disparities in homelessness and overcrowding, and the adequacy of the sites for people from this group. We know that in England and Wales, provision of sites for Gypsy, Roma, and traveller communities has been slow. There is little progress towards new legal sites. In Northern Ireland, the unauthorised encampments order, 2005, had a disproportionate impact on traveller communities. In Scotland, the Gypsy Traveller Action Plan 2019-2021 was welcome, but was not properly evaluated and its impact not properly ascertained. Now, we need more information, up-to-date information on the measures adopted to ensure the availability of affordable and adequate housing for ethnic minority households, including social housing, and measures adopted to tackle the persistent inequalities that affect these households, including overcrowding and poor housing conditions. A number of similar issues can be raised on education. Well, we have information that gypsy traveler children and young people have the lowest attendance and highest exclusion record of any ethnic group in the state party. Transition to senior school is low. And also, notoriously, the gypsy traveler children are reported to have faced racially motivated bullying. On another issue, I would like to have specific information on the steps taken to tackle the causes and legacy of forced assimilation into Scottish society faced by gypsy traveller communities, and steps taken to ensure the adequate participation of the victims and their families on any initiatives to address these events. Let me stop there, Mr. Chair, and I may intervene later if the occasion arose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coot. I thank both country rapporteurs for their questions. And now we will proceed with answers in this part of the dialogue. In the second round, I will take questions from other members of the committee. Madam Head of Delegation, you have the floor for 25 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Coot and Ms. Stavranaki. Allow me to first invite Mr. Lamberti from our Department for Health and Social Care to answer the questions relevant to that matter. Thank you.
Thank you. David Lamberti from the Department for Health and Social Care. The Government is committed to reducing the inequalities in both access and quality of healthcare services for everyone. The NHS has published an Inclusion Health Initiative specifically designed to address the unique needs of socially excluding groups, including members of the Gypsy Roma traveller community. It also covers those in contact with the criminal justice system. More widely, the NHS continues to invest in reducing health inequalities, including through specific programmes such as the NHS Race and...
Would the speaker please get the microphone closer to him? Thank you.
We're taking positive steps to support the Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities and other inclusion health groups through the Inclusion Health Initiative. This programme is specifically designed to address their needs. The framework focuses on the role that the NHS plays in improving healthcare and how partnerships across sectors such as housing and the voluntary and community sector play a key role in addressing wider determinants of health. The framework was published in October 2023. Also in October 2023, our Office for National Statistics published formal data about these communities and some of the issues that they face, including around healthcare. Questions referred to the wider social determinants of health, including air quality, housing. We know that these have an effect, and we know that they contribute to the inequalities that people experience. As part of the government's health mission, we will be tackling those areas. Turning to intellectual property rights, the UK's view is that the TRIPS agreement strikes the correct balance between rewarding innovation with wider societal benefit, incentivises R&D investments, and helps facilitate international partnerships to scale up production of medical products. At the WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference, the UK engaged constructively in negotiations to reach a balanced decision that responded to developing countries' equitable access concerns, while guaranteeing the international IP framework was not undermined. Turning to mental health. We are committed to addressing the inequalities that exist under the Mental Health Act for people from ethnic minority communities, and in particular, Black, African, Caribbean people. We recognise the statistics that the rapporteur referred to. The Patient and Carers Race Equality Framework will support mental health trusts to improve access, experience and outcomes and reduce inequalities for people from ethnic minority groups. All mental health trusts will be required to have a framework in place by March 2025. Pilots are ongoing to test models of culturally appropriate advocacy, to provide tailored support to hundreds of people from ethnic minorities to better understand their rights when they are detained under the Mental Health Act. And thirdly, the government is bringing forward legislation to modernise the Mental Health Act. The updated legislation will give people greater choice and autonomy, enhance rights and support, and ensure everyone is treated with dignity and respect throughout treatment. The bill will be introduced as parliamentary time allows. It was in the King's speech which sets the agenda for this session of Parliament. Turning to infant mortality and maternal issues, the government has invested an additional £300 million to improve support for families through the joint Department for Health and Social Care and Department for Education, Family Hubs and Start for Life programme. The programme is delivering a step change in outcomes for babies, children and their families in 75 local authorities in England, including in those with high levels of deprivation. In addition, the maternity and neonatal 3-year delivery plan, launched in 2023, sets out how the NHS will make maternity and neonatal care safer, more personalised and more equitable for women, babies and families. Thank you. I'll now pass to colleagues.
Thank you. So I will just continue on the theme of health inequalities.
Just a moment. Sorry to interrupt you. A short ad hoc question by the rapporteur to increase the interactive dialogue, please.
Thank you, and apologies. I think it's, it's very welcome, the commitment of the delegation of the government to, and the recognition. We know it's the first step of the recognition of inequalities, and but if we have some time to give a more specific response, in particular with the Mental Health Act, to explain to us what are the strategic choices, legislative choices that actually will strengthen, the autonomy and fulfill the right to integrity and autonomy of especially Black Caribbean persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Davrinaki. Over to you, sir. Or who would like to address this issue?
Perhaps I think while Ms Lamberti finds the detailed response that Ms Davrinaki is asking for, should we move to the further responses and come back to that, if that's all right?
Thank you. So I'll just talk briefly about our work to address COVID inequalities within the UK government. So we conducted an 18-month review of why COVID-19 had such disproportionate impact on ethnic minorities in the UK in terms of infection and mortality rates. And this work helped to shape the UK government's response to the pandemic. We published 4 reports which set out, summarised our work, and our final report, published in December 2021, included a number of recommendations which the then Prime Minister accepted in full. These recommendations were taken forward as part of our Inclusive Britain Action Plan and are about learning lessons from the pandemic and addressing longer-term health inequalities. So these measures include initiatives such as building on the success of our COVID vaccination deployment programme in reaching ethnic minority groups and applying this to future programmes, including winter flu vaccination and childhood immunisation programmes. Importantly, building confidence in future vaccination schemes and other health interventions through increasing ethnic minority participation in clinical trials and research, implementing the lessons learned from our qualitative research, such as ensuring that public health communications do not stigmatise ethnic minorities when explaining they may be more vulnerable or at higher risk of infection. Am I passing back to Mr Lamberti now just to answer the point on Mental Health Act?
Mr Lamberti, are you in a position to respond to that? Once your microphone is working.
Thank you. Apologies for the delay. The bill will make a number of changes which will address current racial disparities. In general, the focus will be on giving patients more agency and more rights to challenge decisions made about them, and that should help to tackle the inequalities that we see. We will make more detail available as the bill is developed, but as a specific example, we will reform community treatment orders so they can only be used where there's a strong justification and a genuine therapeutic benefit for the patient. And these measures should help guard against CTOs being disproportionately used for black patients, who, as you've noted, are currently 8 times more likely to be put on a CTO than white patients. Thank you.
Thank you. I should now like to pick up the questions relating to employment. I'm David Johnson from the Department for Work and Pensions. So on the general points about the employment position of ethnic minorities, the UK government takes the welfare, poverty and employment position of ethnic minority groups very, very seriously, and both poverty and employment are interrelated, and therefore the previous government's approach to tackling poverty was based on evidence that work, particularly where it is full-time, significantly reduces the risk of poverty. There's been progress in both rates of employment changes over time and reductions in poverty, which I'm pleased to report to the committee. The new government will also be reaffirming its commitment to tackling these issues, ensuring that good work remains the foundation of its approach for the UK, and maintaining progress on child poverty specifically with an ambitious child poverty strategy. We also had a question in section 3 around the specific position of Gypsy, Roma and traveller groups, and information from our National Office for Statistics does confirm that the employment rate for Gypsy or Irish traveller groups is much lower than it is for the rest of the UK population. And in response to that, we have a number of targeted activities that we focus on, including promoting Gypsy, Roma and Traveller History Months, promoting knowledge of Gypsy, Roma and Traveller history, culture, disseminating information on positive contribution to British society, and heightening staff confidence inside our Job Centre Plus network around Gypsy, Roma and Traveller issues and the particular employment barriers that they face. Thank you.
Hello. I work for the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and we'll talk about the panel's questions in relation to housing in England. Everybody deserves to live in a decent home and to be treated with fairness and respect, to have their problems quickly resolved. Ethnic minority people are more likely to live in rented accommodation than their own homes, which is why it's so important that we will introduce and are introducing a range of measures to improve the quality of rented accommodation. The new government has committed to introducing a renters' rights bill, which will give much greater security and stability to people so that they can stay in their homes for longer, build lives in their communities and avoid the risk of homelessness. It will also ensure that homes are safe, secure and hazard-free by introducing a decent home standard to the sector and extending AWAB's law, which aims to introduce strict time limits for landlords to fix dangers and hazards in people's homes. A significant reform programme is underway in social housing that seeks to drive improvements across the sector. Reforms to date, including the new regulatory regime brought in by the Social Housing Regulation Act, have focused on improvements to the physical quality and safety of homes, the quality of services to tenants, and the strength of resident voice. However, housing quality and overcrowding is only part of the answer. Sufficiency of the overall volume of homes available is vital to easing the real issues that the panel highlight. The government is committed to delivering 1.5 million new homes by the end of this Parliament, with the biggest increase in social housing and affordable house building in a generation. The £11.5 billion Affordable Homes programme will deliver between 110 and 130,000 homes, and the government has asked Homes England and the Greater London Authority to maximise the number of social rent homes within that. This will have a positive impact for all people, but particularly benefit those from minority ethnic backgrounds who benefit disproportionately from social housing. I will now turn to my colleague from the Department for Education.
May I just interject briefly on the matter of sites for Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities as well, because I know that that's something that was of interest to the committee. Twice a year we run the Traveller Caravan Count, which helps us understand how traveller caravans are being accommodated across England. And this has found that there's been a steady increase in caravans on authorised sites in England, and that's happening alongside a steady increase in numbers of caravans. So, for example, January's traveller caravan count found that there were 26,632 caravans, which was a 7% on the previous year. And of these, 25% were accommodated on socially rented sites, 61% on private sites, and 14% on authorised sites. The 92% of those unauthorised developments were on land owned by travellers, and I think it's worth noting that these figures show that there was both an increase in private site provision, which is part of the government's stated policy aim to increase provision of sites through private providers, as well as a 36% decrease in caravans on unauthorised developments on land not owned by travellers. I don't want to interpret the ownership too deeply, but I think that signifies a change. And just to note that the government seeks to ensure an adequate supply of traveller sites through its planning policies and also by providing funding where appropriate. Our overarching aim is to ensure fair and equal treatment for travellers in a way that both facilitates the traditional and nomadic way of life of travellers while respecting the interest of the settled community. The responsibility for that lies with English local authorities in the same way that they plan for all forms of housing, including, picking up a point I think which was made yesterday or earlier, housing Roma people as well. That is all part of that responsibility. We do this because local authorities are best placed to make decisions about the number and location, particularly of those sites. Our planning, those national planning policies I mentioned, encourage local authorities to plan for sites over a reasonable timescale, and if a planning authority cannot demonstrate an up-to-date 5-year supply of deliverable sites, there are consequences in that the planning policy states that this should be a significant material consideration in any subsequent planning decision when considering applications for the grant of temporary planning permission. The funding there's also been funding made available for travellers' sites. For example, the £10 million Traveller Site Fund in 2022-23 delivered or refurbished 16 permanent and transit traveller sites. Local authorities and registered social housing providers can also bid for funding for new sites through the £11.5 billion Affordable Homes programme. And local planning authorities are also incentivised to build authorised traveller sites where they are needed through the New Homes Bonus Council Tax Match Funding Scheme. Thank you. I will now turn to my colleague from the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. I'll just briefly pick up on the point. I think there's a question on business and human rights, which you would like to have answered. So, of course, I think the committee will be aware that to date the UK's approach to due diligence is based on voluntary due diligence standards as steered by the UN Guiding Principles on Business, which we do see as the authoritative international framework to steer practical action, and also the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises. We do obviously recognise the importance of ensuring that UK businesses are not complicit in human rights abuses and environmental harms, and to that end the new government will be reviewing how we can best tackle human rights abuses and environmental harms in supply chains. But maybe just to expand a bit on what has been done, we have published advice on tackling human rights abuse risks within businesses and international supply chains. Businesses can also access the overseas business risk pages, which includes information on human rights risks when trading overseas. Furthermore, as signatories to the OECD guidelines, we do operate a UK national contact point, which engages UK businesses to increase awareness and understanding of these voluntary principles. Where businesses' operations or supply chains are not in line with these guidelines, the national contact point can administer a non-judicial complaints mechanism, which examines claims made against UK multinational enterprises under the guidelines and seeks to mediate an agreement between parties. Unfortunately, I don't have specific information on cases to hand, but I can follow up in writing if needed. Thank you very much.
Sophie Edwards, Department for Education. I will start with your question regarding children's social care. We are committed to addressing inequalities in the system and want to ensure that every child receives the right support in the right way and at the time to meet their needs. The Children's Social Care National Framework and revised Working Together to Safeguard Children statutory guidance was issued in December 2023. These documents are statutory guidance and set clear national expectations for how children's social care should offer inclusive and engaging support to children and families. I will now cover your question regarding disparities in attainment and progress. The picture of educational achievement across ethnic groups is complex, and different social, economic and cultural factors contribute to this. Pupils from ethnic minority backgrounds should not face barriers to academic achievement. All pupils deserve to be able to access a full education and to leave school with qualifications that allow them to make choices about their future, regardless of their circumstances. The pupil premium is additional funding for state-funded schools to improve education outcomes for disadvantaged pupils in England. It was introduced in 2011 and is supporting schools to deliver high-quality teaching, targeted academic support such as tutoring, and to tackle non-academic barriers to success such as funding activities like breakfast clubs and educational trips. Total pupil premium funding has increased from £600 million in financial year 2011 to 2012 to over £2.9 billion in financial year 2024 to 25. I will now cover your question asked regarding bullying and exclusions. All schools are legally required to have a behaviour policy with measures to prevent all forms of bullying. They are responsible for developing their own anti-bullying strategies appropriate to their environment and are held to account by inspection. In England, the suspension and permanent exclusion guidance is clear that all decisions to exclude a pupil must be lawful, reasonable and fair. The guidance also sets out that head teachers should consider underlying causes or contributing factors of misbehaviour before issuing an exclusion, including where a pupil has SEND. This should ensure appropriate support is in place when concerns arise to address the behavioural issues of pupils rather than waiting for a specific trigger. I will now cover your question regarding teacher diversity. We have seen some improvements over time in the ethnic diversity of the teaching workforce. For example, in November 2023, 16.2% of teachers identified as belonging to an ethnic minority group, up from 13.1% in 2015-16 and 11.2% in 2010-2011. In November 2023, 15.9% of white British teachers and 10% of ethnic minority teachers were in leadership positions, up from 15% and 9.5% respectively in 2015 and 2016 and 13.9% and 8% respectively in 2010-2011. Between 2014 and 2020, the department funded the Equality and Diversity Leadership Fund. The fund supported schools to develop local solutions to help underrepresented teachers take the next step into their leadership journey. I will now cover your question regarding GRT education outcomes. We recognise the issues faced by Gypsy, Roma and Traveller children and young people and how schools and others can make a positive difference. While some pupils from Gypsy, Roma and Traveller backgrounds can and do perform well at school, as a group their attainment and attendance at school is particularly low at every key stage of education. The Department for Education in England convenes a GRT stakeholder group which meets on a termly basis and provides an opportunity to hear about the experiences and concerns in GRT communities. The group works to inform the department's thinking, policy and delivery so that GRT children and young people can fully reap the benefits of our reforms and the barriers they face are addressed. I will now hand over to my colleagues in Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you. In relation to the questions for Northern Ireland, Travellers and Roma thematic groups were established to identify key issues and actions that would improve the well-being of these communities. The groups are mainly made up of people and organisations working closely with and supporting Irish Traveller and Roma communities. Issues covered have focused on health, education and accommodation. In relation to Irish Traveller accommodation, the Northern Ireland Executive is committed to ensuring the accommodation options and services provided for Irish travellers are adequate and culturally appropriate. Actions are being progressed under the Irish Travellers Accommodation Strategy 2021 to 2026. An update on the strategy is produced annually. Actions include a strategic review of Irish traveller sites to identify options for further improvement or replacement, and working with the Irish Government's Housing Agency to complete an all-Ireland review into transitory living. In relation to unauthorised encampments, the Unauthorised Encampments Northern Ireland Order 2005 has not been repealed, but it should be noted that if trespassers are members of the Irish traveller community, then the police service is required to consult with the housing executive as to where there is a suitable pitch for the caravan on a relevant caravan site and situated within a reasonable distance of the land where the trespass is occurring. Turning to health, all migrants and members of minority ethnic communities who are ordinarily resident in Northern Ireland and people seeking asylum have equal access to health and social care. Mental health support for all communities in Northern Ireland, including those from minority ethnic backgrounds, is a priority for the Northern Ireland Executive. The 10-year mental health strategy sets out the future strategic direction of mental health services, providing a clear direction of travel towards providing support and promoting good mental health. The community and voluntary sector also provides vital mental health services to communities across Northern Ireland, with some offering services specifically to minority groups such as Irish travellers. The ethnic profile in Northern Ireland is significantly different to that in the rest of the UK, with a very small number of neonatal deaths of Black and Asian ethnicity. However, we acknowledge that this is undoubtedly an important group that need to be appropriately supported throughout their pregnancy journey. Regardless of ethnicity, improving the health and well-being of mothers and babies, particularly those from a socially deprived community, remains a priority. In relation to children in care, there is evidence to suggest that children from minority ethnic backgrounds are overrepresented in the care system in Northern Ireland. Over recent years, there has been an increase in numbers of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children arriving in Northern Ireland. This increase may in part explain the overrepresentation of children from minority ethnic backgrounds in the care system. Work is ongoing across government departments, working with partners in the voluntary and community sectors to improve the range of supports available to children and their families in the community, including support targeted to those from minority ethnic backgrounds, and to identify and address areas of unmet need. The aim of this work is to prevent children entering the care system and to support families to stay together. Turning to education, a range of funding support is available within education for newcomers, traveller, Roma children and asylum seeker and refugee children. In 23-24, there were 21,000 newcomer pupils in the school system, accounting for 5.9% of the school population. Regular pupil attendance at school remains an ongoing and significant challenge for many schools and pupils, with particularly significant challenges faced by, for example, Irish traveller children. In terms of educational support, schools provide both English as a core curriculum subject as well as English as an additional language for those children that require it until their level of English reaches the level of their peers. All schools signpost newcomer families to sources of additional English language learning in the community, including formal and informal English for speakers of other languages. The Education Authority provides cultural awareness training through Queen's University Belfast in support of school staff working with newcomer children with English as an additional language. Whilst there have been improvements in 22-23 and 23-24, work is underway within the department to consult upon a new attendance strategy. This updated strategy reflects a range of challenges facing children and young people and their families since the pandemic. The Addressing Bullying in Schools Act, Northern Ireland 2016, places a duty on schools to record instances of bullying, their motivation and their outcome, including racist bullying. The Act aims to assist schools in identifying issues between pupils from different racial backgrounds and to put in place suitable interventions to address racist bullying. Turning to poverty, the anti-poverty strategy will aim to address poverty and the impacts of social economic disadvantage, including for minority ethnic communities, and set out the Northern Ireland Executive's commitment to a joined-up long-term approach to addressing poverty. And finally, in relation to employment, the economic vision is to increase the proportion of the working age population working in a good job. Consultation on ways in which we can strengthen our employment rights legislation to help deliver on this was recently launched. Almost 37,000 minority ethnic people aged 16 to 64 are employed in Northern Ireland, equating to an employment rate of 73.2%. Thank you. Pass to Scottish colleagues.
Given the time commitment that and there's less than 40 seconds left.
Sorry, let me just to the Chair to agree that there is an additional couple of minutes each for the Scottish and the Welsh governments to make their points. Thank you.
In relation to racism and discrimination and racialised health inequalities, we recognise that both racism and discrimination are fundamental drivers of this. We're therefore taking an anti-racism approach to address racialised inequalities in healthcare. Our priorities are based on the recommendations of the Expert Reference Group on COVID-19 and ethnicity and the wider evidence where improvement is needed, and these include leadership, data, workforce and equitable service delivery. With regard to service delivery, key areas of focus are type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, perinatal care and mental health. And we have asked all NHS executives to include an anti-racism focus within their business objectives for 24-25, including the specific requirement of an anti-racism plan covering workforce and service delivery. Scottish Government has been working with stakeholders, including the NHS Scotland Minority Ethnic Forum, to develop guidance to support anti-racism planning, which will be published shortly. In relation to perinatal care, which is maternal and infant health, this contributes to the wider Scottish Government priorities, acknowledging the unique position that maternity and neonatal care occupies in the health landscape. The Scottish Government continues to follow co-production and co-creation policy development in this area to ensure that lived experience is at the centre of the work. I will stop there and pass to my colleagues from the Welsh Government.
Thank you very much. I'll be very quickly covering mental health. Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan include actions to ensure minority ethnic voices influence mental health policy and legislation. We have established a mental health ethnic minority task in Finnish group, co-chair with the Wales Alliance for Mental Health. The upcoming mental health strategy will adopt a right-based, person-certain approach, which will be focusing on the underserved group. Improvement Cymru, they're developing good practice guidelines to improve psychological care for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Efforts also underway to improve the mental health support for asylum seekers, refugees, migrants, including Traumatic Stress Wales initiative, which is 1.2 million annually. And finally, a network for sharing good practice support for the creation of culturally applicable and co-produced resources. I'll quickly cover some points around the maternity and neonatal health. We recognize that Black and Asian women have higher maternal mortality rate than the white woman. The maternity and neonatal support safety program has been commissioned to detail and implement specific changes to maternity services that will improve outcomes and experiences for Black, Asian and minority ethnic women and families who experience health inequalities. Steps also been taken to improve data collections for ethnic minority communities, and there will be a national maternity digitalization projects. Again, all maternity units in Wales, they have signed up to an accreditation program to improve the cultural competence and understanding of staff and environment. And my final point is with regards to the care system, where we have senior representation from the third sector organization, Ethnic Minority and Youth Support Team. They are a member of the Transformation Delivery Group, which play a key role in shaping our program of work to transform children's services in Wales. We are providing funding to East through our third sector grant scheme for our projects which provides a referral-based service to Black minority ethnic children and young people aged 0 to 25. The funding is being provided for 115,000 plus pound, and that is between 2022-2025. And I now ask my colleagues to cover two other areas.
I apologize, but we need to move to the next round of questions. I understand that all the devolved governments had the chance to to speak in this round?
They have, but I think that there were some matters that they weren't able to cover.
Let's try to cover it in this last round, if I may suggest. You will be given opportunity very briefly. Dear colleagues, we can proceed to second round, but all we have is 20 minutes, including questions and answers. So I will now, without delay, pass the floor to country rapporteurs and other members of the committee. The more time we leave for the delegation to answer, the more answers we will hear. Mr. Kut, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a question, just a comment to repeat my earlier comment. We take careful note of all the policies and plans and programs that are reported to us. But what we are mostly interested in is a commitment on the continuation of these and improvements and impact assessment and evaluation and so on. So I would like to underline this, that, you know, it's good to have all kinds of plans and projects, but it's important that there is political will to pursue the end result of these. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kut. Ms. Stavrinaki, you don't have any follow-up questions. Now, so I will follow the list of speakers I have here. Mrs. Seneme is the next speaker.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Chairman, for giving me the floor. I will be brief. The committee has learnt that for the same qualification and posts, black persons receive a lower salary vis-à-vis white employees. This constitutes discrimination pursuant to Article 1 of the Convention. The question, therefore, is the following. What justifies this inegalitarian policy? Is the state planning to review this employment policy in order to treat all employees based on the principle of equal pay for equal work? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Seneme. The next speaker on my list is Ms. Shepherd.
Thank you very much, Chair. First, I just want to say that I repeat the questions on the decade, and if they can't be provided now, they can be sent in writing. You will explain, Chair, how this can be done, what activities, especially from education, were implemented during the decade. Was it launched officially? I understand that you perhaps can't answer on the second decade, but again, hope you will support. In terms of public monuments as part of education, Chair, in this regard, I congratulate Northern Ireland for the monument to Frederick Douglass, a formerly enslaved African American in the USA. And I'm also aware that the Mayor of London will be erecting a monument in tribute to the victims of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans. But in addition, I would suggest a monument, a collective one, to all the hundreds of men and women, including by execution, who were punished in the struggles for freedom as they fought to end chattel enslavement. And your archives can provide you, your wonderful archives, with the names of those. I also note the Commission, again, Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities report of 2021. But while there are some useful findings in this report, it appears to be going against the need to decolonize the curriculum, especially the history curriculum. And I hope that the State Party will disregard comments and suggestions like there's a new story about the Caribbean experience, which speaks of the slave period not only being about profit and suffering, but also about how culturally African people transform themselves into a remodeled African Britain. I have no doubt that people of African descent did transform themselves as well as the communities in which they found themselves. But I hope the State Party can give some assurance that the history of the empire is not watered down in the history syllabus. I know it's a painful past, but also this painful past is exactly what fuels the demand for reparation. The Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, the Sewell report, also found a correlation between ethnicity and educational achievement, looking at disparities by ethnic groups, and Ms. Stavrinaki has already given details on the findings. But I was struck by the report's conclusion that family structure seems to be a factor in the achievements and outcomes and performance of the various ethnic groups. So do you support this conclusion, or should institutionalized and structural discriminatory practices, which are central features of the experience of children of African descent and other ethnic minorities in the UK, not also be highlighted as a factor? And finally, Chair, in terms of human rights education and the legacy of colonialism and slavery, list of themes, paragraph 28, can the State Party indicate if human rights education includes the right of people affected by the legacies of British colonialism, both in the UK and in its colonies and former colonies? If you understand that human rights education should include reparations, is this so? Will the government, the new government, be any more willing to respond positively to the growing demand for reparations? I know that there are people who consider foreign aid and as reparations and frame multilateral talks within the context of, reparation. But the CARICOM 10-point plan sees reparations within the right to development framework, within a framework of structural transformation, which includes debt cancellation, not restructuring, especially in cases where former colonies within the Commonwealth feel trapped in a cycle of debt that is affecting their ability to ensure infrastructural development in areas like health and education. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Shepherd. We'll proceed with other speakers. Kindly note that the time indicated is all we have, also for answers. Mr. Tlemceni.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I will strive to be brief and direct. Based on studies, children from minorities undergo much more discrimination than others in the United Kingdom. Children who are black are monitored by the police 4 times more often than white children. Also, minors have been placed in detention for taking part in demonstrations for the climate. And my questions are as follows. How does the government intend to overcome systematic discrimination that children from minorities are victims of, particularly the disproportionate monitoring of children from minority groups monitored by the police? What measures will the government take to protect minors who take part in demonstrations, particularly to avoid threats of detention? I also have another question, and this relates to 2 children, and this had an impact on large families, particularly when it comes to limiting financial support. This policy has contributed to the increase in poverty and the worsening of inequalities, and thus my question is as follows. How will the new government deal with the impact of a limit of 2 children, and what other measures will be made to support those families? Thank you.
Mr. Tlemceni. Next speaker is Ms. Lakula, then Mr. Amir. Ms. Lakula.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I listened carefully to the responses on provision of health care to ethnic minorities, but I did not hear a response to the recommendation that the committee had made that the State Party should effectively address the overrepresentation of Caribbeans of African descent in psychiatric institutions and the disproportionate use of restraint, seclusion, and medication. If you can just please deal with this. I did not hear a response to this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Lakula. Mr. Amir, brief question, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chairman. This time I will speak in French. I didn't receive a reply to the question I raised. I would like to know whether yes or no, the responsibility of the United Kingdom is something that nowadays can be taken into account to explain the fact that the Palestinian people have never been entitled to exercise their right to self-determination. A UN decision, however, had been taken, and there was a mandate by the Trustees Council. And today we note an inexplicable situation. So, yes or no? Is the United Kingdom willing to provide reparation and repair what has been done and enable the Palestinian people to live decently? Please provide me with a response, even if it isn't a satisfactory one to me. There's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than ignorance before leaving.
Oui ou non? Merci. Question est bien notée, monsieur.
We have taken due note of your question, Madam, Mr. Amir. Madam Tebier, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chairman. My statement will focus on racial discrimination in the workplace. Based on information available to us, in several public and private establishments, there are alarming incidents of racism reported in the workplace against persons of African descent and persons of Asian descent, in particular Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Gypsies, Roma, travellers, migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, and other minorities in the UK, in spite of the law on equality adopted in that regard in 2010. This is connected to several factors. Inter alia, a lack of understanding and awareness about what racism is. And this is being manifest in the workplace. The fear of reprisals of victims if they make a complaint, the very few remedies possible, be given that the lack of specialised courts dealing with racism and the lack of availability of lawyers to defend the victims. Could the delegation provide us with the statistics collected when it comes to racism in the workplace based on national origin and ethnic origin? What mechanisms have been set up to detect and identify clear and hidden forms of racial discrimination in the workplace? The burden of proof based on racial discrimination in the workplace is placed on the victim and not the perpetrator. What measures will the state take to review its legislation in order to reverse the burden of proof? What administrative and legal mechanism is established to provide reparation in a case of racial discrimination in the workplace? Please provide us with detailed information as to the number of trained magistrates in this particular area, as well as awareness-raising campaigns rolled out for employers and workers as to the various forms of racial discrimination, its manifestation and consequences. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Tebier. And the last speaker in this round is Mr. Diaby.
Thank you, Chair. Chairman, I would like to welcome the responses provided by the delegation, who have made an effort to reply to our concerns. Yesterday, the delegation gave me some degree of hope. I had asked whether the state was inclined to adopt legislation, just like other states, to recognise slavery as being a crime against humanity. And I was led to believe that the new government, well, we'll leave some time for the new government to settle in, but we hope that legislation will be able to be adopted in order to recognise slavery as a crime against humanity and adopt measures in terms of reparative justice. Sir, I'd like to come back to paragraph 22 of the State Party report, where you talk about a national action plan for an inclusive England to combat ethnic disparities and highlight the need for responsible media coverage which is sensitive to information related to ethnic minorities, so as to maintain the trust of these communities and the rest of society, to undertake actions to highlight the accuracy of reporting on ethnic and racial origin so as to contribute to eliminating the stigmatization, which is deliberate or not, of all ethnic groups and promote social cohesion. What has been the assessment of that report? In paragraph 117 of the report, the Historic Action Plan states that you wish to achieve inclusive education, to ensure that the government is committed to various ethnic groups to better understand the language and terminology that they identify with, to consider the impact of media coverage of racial and ethnic issues on the communities covered, and draw up recommendations by 2023. So my question is whether those recommendations have indeed been drafted, and I would encourage responsible and specific reporting on racial issues. Lastly, the Independent Commission on the Media imposes norms and standards which are clear-cut when it comes to harmful material or offensive material, as well as citations or crimes, hate crimes. And I'd like to know whether that plan has also been evaluated and assessed. Thank you, sir.
Diaby, may I ask Secretariat to allocate 8 minutes to the delegation? Madam Head of Delegation, floor is yours. If something cannot be answered within 8 minutes, we kindly request for written responses. But the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Committee, may I invite, we will try to answer what we can in the time available. May I invite colleagues from the Scottish Government to begin? Thank you.
Thank you. I will pick up on 3 specific points. The first is in relation to the ethnicity pay gap. We are tackling this through our commitments to the anti-racist employment strategy, which was published in 2022 and includes a range of actions, including improving recruitment practices, increasing the anti-racist capacity of senior leaders, supporting employers to use positive action measures, creating a training framework for employers, and pulling together anti-racist and other fair work resources into a central online hub. In relation to the decolonisation of the curriculum, it is critically important that we embed anti-racist practice and principles in initial and ongoing professional development for teachers and educators, and our recent programme for government sets this out. So a decolonised curriculum which reflects diversity, social justice and Scotland's role in the transatlantic enslavement is in place. Principles for an anti-racist curriculum include breaking the mould, and these were published in 2023 and were co-created by young people who have an expertise in anti-racism, and also by the Children's Parliament in Scotland. The final point I will make is in relation to housing, and in 2021 we published a housing needs of minority ethnic evidence review to support our understanding of these groups in Scotland. Some key findings of the housing needs indicated that minority ethnic highest income households were more likely to be living in the private rented sector and less likely to be living in the social rented sector or in owner occupation. They were also much more likely to be living in relative poverty after housing costs. So since 2017 and including 24-25 this year, we've invested over £613 million in discretionary housing payments, which are a vital tool to reduce poverty, safeguard tenancies and prevent homelessness. And the final point that I would like to make on that is that in Scotland as well, we're also increasing the housing supply by delivering 110,000 affordable homes by 2032, of which at least 70% will be available for social rent, and that local housing strategies need to include a statement that reflects their commitment to addressing inequalities in housing. And I will conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I will keep this brief in terms of we could cover the whole wealth of areas but can provide information in written form. So I'm just going to cover Gypsy, Roma and traveller accommodation, homes and education. We recognise that we need to do so much more to ensure that Gypsy, Roma and travellers have access to culturally appropriate and decent sites. We're wholly committed, to address Mr Coote's point, to monitoring and evaluating progress as part of our Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. We have legislation, the Housing Wales Act, that places a statutory duty on local authorities to assess the accommodation needs of gypsies and travellers in their area. And we expect them to address the needs to meet any gap which exists, and are providing a capital funding of £3.44 million for this financial year for local authorities to fulfil their duties, and that's for residential sites, transit sites. It includes also acquisition of land. Briefly, let me turn to education. We recognise in Welsh Government the significant racial disparities in educational attainment, and again are absolutely committed to monitoring and evaluating all interventions. We have dedicated funding to support improved educational outcomes for learners from ethnic minority and Gypsy, Roma, Traveller children and young people. £11 million has been allocated to support this work, and that's as part of a £160 million grant to local authorities to support equity in education. The £11 million supports ethnic minority learners, including through a traveller education services, as well as refugees and asylum-seeking children. And just returning to that point briefly, that we have also recognised the importance of cultural heritage and Black, Asian and ethnic minority histories by making these mandatory part of the curriculum. Just very briefly on attainment, a number of groups of children, young people from ethnic minority backgrounds are outperforming white pupils. Very happy to give all the stats for that, but we do have concerning results for a number of groups, and that includes Gypsy, Roma and Traveller learners, and where their examination results showed that, that they had the highest percentage of GCSE entries with no resulting GCSE grade. So we have produced new guidance called Education Guidance to Support Gypsy, Roma and Traveller Children, Young People, and children and young people from Gypsy, Roma, Traveller communities were involved in that guidance. Just finally, on anti-bullying, we have statutory anti-bullying guidance, rights, respect, equality, setting out our expectations that prejudice-related bullying is carefully considered and prevention strategies put in place across local authorities. And we will be refreshing the guidance in autumn 2024, and that will take the update will take account of recent data shared by learners about their experiences, including around prejudice-related bullying. Many thanks.
Turning to the questions on ethnicity pay gaps. So the new UK government has announced its intention to legislate to introduce mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting for larger employers. It's also announced that it will introduce or extend the current equal pay regime to ethnic minorities. And on workplace discrimination, the Equality Act 2010 provides a robust framework against direct and indirect discrimination, harassment and victimisation across a number of grounds, including race and ethnicity. And I think we provided statistics to the committee yesterday on the number of discrimination claims brought before the employment tribunals. I'll pass to my colleague, Mr. Askoff.
Thank you, Ms Shepherd, for your comments on monuments that have been erected across the UK to remember those who have suffered and died as a result of the UK's colonial history. There are many such examples around the country. There are also many new plaques and information boards to explain the background of old monuments that many would say celebrate those guilty of crimes against humanity, for example, in relation to the UK's part in the slave trade. I cannot make any commitment here about a new monument of the kind you suggest, but I will certainly take this point away with me. Thank you for the suggestion.
Thank you. I will just jump in again on the issue of reparations for slavery. I think I did address this yesterday. We do understand it's an extremely complex history that the UK has with this issue, and it's one that the new government will be looking into very carefully. On the Israel-Gaza conflict, given that this keeps coming up, as our Prime Minister has said, now is the time for calm. If we are to achieve lasting peace and stability in the Middle East, we have been very clear that Hamas must stop endangering civilians and that Israel must comply with international humanitarian law. We continue to call for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, an increase in humanitarian aid to Gaza, and compliance with international humanitarian law. We want a credible and irreversible pathway towards a two-state solution, a safe, secure Israel, alongside a viable, sovereign Palestinian state. And I'll hand back to the chair, I think.
Well, thank you very much. I really wish we had more time. I'm sure we wouldn't mind to have 1 or 2 more days, but this is all we have. I would like to thank the delegation of the United Kingdom and Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the members of the committee for the dialogue, which I would call constructive and intensive. Now I would like to give the floor to the follow-up rapporteur, Ms. Lakula, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairperson. I would like to really thank the State Party for providing us with a follow-up report. and also responding to the recommendations that we had made in the current report. We're also going to be including in the concluding observations a paragraph on follow-up on the recommendations, implementation of recommendations that you have to submit to the committee within 1 year of the receipt of the concluding observations, and would really appeal to you to respond as you did previously. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Tlakula. I give the floor to the Counter-rapporteur for his final remarks. Mr. Kut.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the delegation and everybody who have contributed to it for the open and frank discussions and dialogue that we were able to hold. We are not here to judge or criticize state parties. We are here to identify the issues that they face in terms of racial discrimination at home, and we try to help them achieve their own goals by coming up with certain recommendations. As the eminent Professor Patrick Thornberry, who was a long-serving member of this committee from the UK, and this committee has benefited a lot from his input, has produced a lot of literature on this. The success of the state parties in countering issues of, in taking care of issues of racial discrimination is our success. We are only successful when you are successful. So please contribute to our success by candidly facing all the challenges that you have at home, and use political will to find solutions to persistent problems that keep coming in front of us. I would also like to thank all the members, representatives of the national human rights institutions and the NGO, of course our members, the co-rapporteur, Ms. Stavrinaki, and also the translation and conference services. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kut. Now I give the floor to the head of delegation, Ms. Elizabeth Hawkins, for her final remarks, with a kind request to the interpreters to stay with us for 2 or 3 more minutes. Thank you very much in advance. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the whole committee for having us here in Geneva over the past 2 days. We've really appreciated the warm welcome and the very constructive spirit with which you have worked with us, and I hope you found our answers helpful and insightful. Allow me to briefly address a couple of points we weren't able to answer fully at the time. And we will also be writing with further information on matters where needed. Thank you for that. We were asked for statistics on referrals of children to the Prevent programme. We now have them. In the year ending March 2024, 40 people aged 17 and under were arrested for terrorist-related activity. This is an increase from 24 in the previous year, with the proportion slightly increasing by 5 percentage points. Regarding the question of child poverty, which I know was of great interest to many of the committee, the new government's Child Poverty Task Force will be considering a wide range of issues that contribute to it and which can address child poverty, and I'm sure that the consideration of the matters which this committee deals with will be a key element in that. Also on education, the new UK government has set up an opportunity mission across the government to break the link between people's background and their success, and I'm sure that the work of that will be relevant to future conversations with this committee. Allow me to finish by reiterating that the UK is fully committed to building a fairer country and taking the action needed to address racial inequalities, whether they be in England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the British Overseas Territories or the Crown Dependencies. We are a country that embraces difference and encourages people to be proud of their identity, not to suppress it. Yet we know that not everyone is yet able to do that, and we look forward to working with you and with our partners across the international system to end racial discrimination for good. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Elizabeth Hawkins and all the members of the delegation for the replies and for this dialogue. The committee will work on the concluding observations that will be forwarded to you after adoption, of course. I would like to also recall that the delegation has 48 hours starting from now to provide any supplementary information on questions that couldn't be answered due to lack of time. Again, many thanks. I think this was a very intensive and fruitful dialogue. This concludes our review of the UK for today. I would like to remind my colleagues that we will start the review of the Iraq at 3 p.m. this afternoon. And many thanks to the interpreters. The 3092nd meeting is closed. Thank you.